Hi. Wow, this is a more technically advanced audience than I normally get. That last session was quite scary in terms of what you can do so easily. Those are two gentlemen you do not want to make angry, I think. How many of you, these things work so much better, by the way, if you plug them in. It's like a lot of technology. Let's see if that works. How many of you know what this is? One of you does? OK. So this, basically, is where your last relationship began. And this is the view that Facebook has into your relationship. How it knows that is via these little black dots, which are the number of timeline posts that are made between any two people. And the x-axis over here is time. So when we see this ramp up, this indication that a relationship is imminent, the time scale there is about 100 days. So as much as this is interesting, that they can tell where your next relationship began, even if you don't change your status on Facebook to tell them, because enough people have done that to train them. It's interesting to wonder where within those 100 days do they actually know, can they predict, perhaps before you know, that you are about to start a relationship. So this also brings about some questions, as in who owns this information and this data? So of course, when they released this, there was a blog post that went along with it. And in the comments, somebody asks, is this anonymized data publicly available? And the response is, sorry, we don't even release anonymized data to the public. This is strictly for internal use. So the answer to who owns this data and the intelligence that's derived from this data, of course, is Facebook. And if you've been following the news today, they just bought WhatsApp for a reported, well, they're in the process of buying WhatsApp for a reported $19 billion. That's $16 billion plus $3 billion in restricted stock options in the future. So what they really bought for that $19 billion is over 450 million active users, and quite possibly, more importantly, every conversation that they're going to have in the future. So you might be thinking, so what? All right, this is old news, right? We know that this is what certain social networks, et cetera, do. Well, it matters. It matters because computers have changed in the last 30 or 40 years, right? These were the kind of computers my dad used to work with. I've seen them. I walked alongside, and I went, kind of ignored them and went to see my little classic, well, not classic, original Mac that was there, or I was playing with PCs. But these machines were external. They weren't personal, right? They were business machines. You actually drove to use one, right? Today, we wear them on our persons. You don't get more personal than that. We wear them and we walk around with them. And whereas back in the good old days, they were external, they were disconnected from each other, and they were disconnected from the world around them, today, they are always connected. They're always on. They're always listening, always seeing, always aware of the environment that they're in via their plethora of sensors. I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that today we are cyborgs. This is not because we embed technology within our bodies necessarily, although some of us do. I don't. But because we extend our biological capabilities via technology. And this, I believe, is a definition of a cyborg. Furthermore, we both experience and manipulate reality through these tools. So increasingly, these tools, these services by which we manipulate and experience reality, stop being an optional thing and become essential. Today, the alternative to not using these is, in a way, separating yourself, disconnecting yourself from modern life. And whether or not these tools are designed well determines whether they empower us or they enfeeble us. And we love the ones that empower us, right? So the question then becomes, who owns our tools? And today, for much of society, for the mainstream, the answer is a handful of companies, whether it's Apple or Facebook or Twitter or Google. And the commonality between these is that they are all closed. They're all closed silos. And some of these companies, furthermore, share another characteristic. If we take Apple out of there for now, because goodness knows how their business model will evolve in the future, some of these companies share another business model, or share a business model. The business model of free. They give you free services, right? So what? Free's great. Who doesn't love free? Free is awesome, right? So here's a new startup that I want to tell you about. You guys are going to love it, okay? Has anyone heard of snail mail? No? Snail mail is great, okay? We have done something amazing with snail mail. We have solved a very important problem, the problem of real mail. With snail mail, you will get free real mail forever. Send as many letters, as many parcels as you want to anyone on the face of the planet for free forever. Who thinks it's a great idea? Who would use this? Yeah, some of you. Awesome, right? There is a caveat, though, right? There's a caveat. We do open your letters, and we do read them, okay? But we only do this so that we can give you helpful suggestions, you know, that we understand about what you're doing, right? And then we just put it all back into a letter, and we send, and you wouldn't even know we were there, right? Who'd still use this? There's always one. There is always one person. It's like, it's free, all right? I will use it. It's free. For the rest of you, I'm sure some of you, and here I might actually get a negative response to this, but I'm sure some of you use Gmail, right? Anyone here uses Gmail? Okay, even in this group, open hardware user group, right? Okay, you use Gmail. They do the same thing. There might not be people opening and reading your letters, but there are algorithms, there are computers doing the same thing. Why? Because they want to find out more about you, because they're building a profile of you. So that's snail mail. Tell your friends. It's going to be big. Snailmail.com. There is a presentation if you go there. Sorry? No, it's not serious. It's not serious. He's like, you're horrible. Why are you here talking to us? Can I take questions at the end, by the way? Sorry? Or Amazon. There you go. Yes. So why does Google do this with Gmail, right? Are they evil? Is it a conspiracy? No. You don't need conspiracies when you have the simplicity of business models. It is simply their business model. Google makes money, the billions that they make, by monetizing your data. That's it. No conspiracy. Just a simple business model, right? If you're familiar with the musical and the film of the musical Little Shop of Horrors, there is a mutant plant from outer space. I'm sorry, you can't really see it there. It's got a big plant with sharp teeth called Audrey 2 that needs blood to grow. Starts off as a sapling, just a little bit of blood, and then starts eating people. In the same way, Google needs your data to grow. And any other services that are free need your data to grow. And how does Google get this data, right? Firstly, services. So Google started as a service company, right? Initially, they weren't even keeping any of the data. It was only after 9/11 and the Patriot Act made it valuable to keep that data that they started, and they stumbled onto their actual business model. Initially, it was just a text box that found you things, and it was great because AltaVista sucked. You just realized. You didn't even know AltaVista sucked until you used Google, and then you just never used AltaVista again if you were around. But today, it's not the same thing. Today, it is a plethora of services, right? You can put all of your documents up on Google Drive, and then Google knows everything that's in your documents. You can use Gmail for all of your correspondence, and Google knows who you're talking to and what you're saying. Gtalk, same thing. Google+, they have your social graph, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They have a health spin-off right now. They have self-driving cars in the works. They've just bought several robotics companies, including the one, Boston Dynamics, that makes Big Dog, right? So how do they get that data, though? They give you games, little games. Who's used a reCAPTCHA on a site? Pretty cool, right? reCAPTCHA protects your site, but at the same time, you're teaching Google how to read books, right? How to understand books. These are scanned in words from books that it's having trouble reading, so it's asking you. So it's a little game. It gets you to contribute. In this case, quite harmless, right? Kind of nice. We're helping our kind of knowledge, or at least Google's knowledge, grow. It also has actual games. Who's heard of Ingress here? Ingress, right? You walk around, and you have to take photographs of various monuments. You're in teams. You're trying to beat each other. It's a real game. But really what you're doing is you're giving Google very valuable and hard-to-come-by data, which is pedestrian traffic patterns, right? So just like you would with lab rats or guinea pigs in a lab, right? You would prod them to see what they do. You give them a maze to run through. That's what Google's doing with us. But with services, it's easy, right? If you don't like what Google is doing, what do? You don't use their services, right? You either use somebody else's, you use an open source alternative, etc., right? So what is a company that needs data supposed to do at this point if it's so easy for you to use somebody else's service? They can give you devices, right? They can give you beautiful, gorgeous devices like Nexus phones and tablets and Chromebooks, right? At that point, what they're doing is they're making your login for the device your Google login, right? So no matter what application you use, they're still getting some valuable data. No matter what service you use, they're still getting some valuable data at that point. So the way I like to look at it is these are really lovely data collection devices, data entry devices that they're providing at a subsidy. But what is the end game? Because you can still choose to use other devices, right? You can choose to not include the Google Play Store and Google's own apps and just run CyanogenMod. Or you can get an iPhone. Whether that's better or not, I don't know. Or you can get a Firefox OS phone. And, I don't know whether that's better or not. What's the end game? Connectivity. Now, this is awesome. Because if your login to the internet becomes your Google username and password, becomes your Google login, then no matter what device you use, they're going to get some data from you, right? Remember, they just need your data. So here, Google Fiber, sign in with your Google username and password, right? That's for the so-called developed world right now, and especially just the US. What about the rest of the world? What about the next billion that all of these companies are talking about? The next billion we want on the internet? Well, for them, Google has Google Loon, right? This is real. I don't know if you guys have heard. This is to provide internet connectivity via balloons for the next billion. So quite possibly, there might be a whole nation at some point. There might be a whole group of people whose only knowledge of the internet is something that you sign into with a Google username and password. It's not just Google. Facebook wants to do the same thing with internet.org, right? This is the end game if your business model is monetizing data. That's how you get it. So just like Audrey 2 needs blood to grow, free services need your data to grow. So you might have heard the famous saying, if you're not paying for it, you are not the customer, you are the product being sold. I like to say you are the quarry being mined, right? In a sense, people are the livestock of the 21st century, and these closed silos are where we are farmed. So what? I'm happy with this. I know exactly what our relationship is with Google or Facebook. I am willing to forego certain amounts of privacy so that I will get these free services, right? I'm okay with this. And I know that if I said something is private, that'll be private. And if I said it's public, I'm happy with the status quo. Well, ever since 9/11, things have changed a bit, right? Right after 9/11, in the US, they set up the Information Awareness Office with the goal of attaining total information awareness, all right? And this was their real logo, their actual logo. Now, there are lessons to be learned from this, right? If you set up a government agency whose goal is to know everything about everyone on the face of the planet, do not make your logo a huge pyramid with an all-seeing eye shooting lasers at the world. It scares people. And that's what it did. It scared people, right? And it got shot down. It got shot down, but it didn't get shut down. And it lived on. As the Snowden revelations showed, the NSA does not understand PowerPoint design. But beyond that, all of these companies that we trusted to various degrees with our data, we're sharing that data with the government, right? Now, there's one thing that we need to acknowledge about this slide, though, and I think it's really important to acknowledge it. Microsoft was first at something. Now, that doesn't happen every day. I think they deserve some respect for that, I guess. And what were they sharing? They were sharing everything. Everything that we thought was private. Why? Because it is much easier for a government to ask a corporation for data that you have voluntarily shared with that corporation than it is for it to surveil that data directly from you. If it is going to spy on you directly, it needs cause, it needs warrants, right? And it's expensive. They're not going to come and set an agent per one of you to follow you around, right? That's very expensive. They wouldn't do that. It's silly, right? Well, the Stasi didn't have our technology. Imagine what they could do if they had. So instead, if you've volunteered it, that information is no longer under the same protections. And they can get it via the means that we found out they do get it, right? So these companies, I am sure, are really deeply concerned. The Googles, the Facebooks are really deeply concerned about this. They must be, right? So let's see what Eric Schmidt had to say about this. He said, there's been surveillance for years. I'm not going to pass judgment on that. It's the nature of our society, right? So Eric, with a slight buzz, tell us, what should we do about it then?
If you have something that you don't want anyone to know, maybe you shouldn't be doing it in the first place. Maybe you shouldn't be doing it in the first place.
So if you have something you don't want anyone to know, maybe you shouldn't be doing it in the first place. Why didn't we think of this, right? And I have to say, Eric is a stand-up guy, right? He said this, but afterwards, he went out and he created several websites to really prove his point. So here are some of my favorite ones. ericstoiletantics.com is a really nice one with pictures and videos. Then there's Eric's favorite sexy times, which is a bit weird for my taste. But my favorite is, of course, ericsmasturbationadventures.com. Now, of course, none of these websites exist, nor should they. Because, why? Because privacy is not about having something to hide, but by having the right to control what you want to share and what you want to keep to yourself. It is a fundamental human right. A fundamental human right, furthermore, that is enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in Article 12. Why? For various reasons. But imagine a world where private is not the default, where public is the default. In a world where public is the default, anything you want to keep private has the taint of something that's illegal, has the taint of something that is that you want to hide, right? We need to make the default private, and that's how it's written up as well in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that we all have a default right to privacy. So Google is emerging, and Facebook, etc., are emerging as some of the biggest threats that we have to our privacy, and therefore, subsequently, to our civil rights and our human rights as well, to our civil liberties and to our human rights. Google and other such free services are leading us down a path that I call digital feudalism. What is digital feudalism? It is a state of affairs where we no longer own our own tools, our services, our data, and any derived intelligence from that data, but we have to rent them from various corporate entities. And whether or not we're living in a digital feudalism, that's a very different type of society, right? If we're living in a digital feudalism, we're living in a society where we don't enjoy civil liberties, and we probably have greatly reduced human rights. So this is the problem. If you want to find out more about the problem, and if you want to tell your non-techie friends about the problem, there is a great documentary called Terms and Conditions May Apply. It came out mid-last year. It makes the case in an entirely non-technical way. I held several screenings of this in Brighton during my residency at Lighthouse. And I think now it's available on Netflix and on iTunes. And you can find it online as well, I believe, for a DRM-free download as well. So that's the problem. If we leave it at the problem, it's a very depressing place to be. So let's not do that. Because especially everyone in this room is, I mean, you guys are in a very special group, right? You guys can be the solution and the answer to this. You have the technical knowledge to be this. What is the alternative? As we all know, it is in the name of this gathering. The alternative is open, right? And it's easy. I don't understand why we don't have more adoption, why regular people aren't really taking this on. Because it's so easy, right? Number one, you clone the Git repository, yeah? So easy, of an open iCloud solution, maybe with some social features, right? Number two, you configure and deploy it to your own server. That's easy. Why can't everyone do this, right? And then number three, you just get all of your friends to do the same thing. And we're up and running. We could solve this like that, right? It's not easy. And that's the biggest problem we have in open today. Something can be open, but inaccessible to a certain group of people, right? Open source today, the biggest problem that we have is the user experience. So let me give you an example. Here, you've all heard of Firefox OS, right? Open source operating system for mobile phones, and there are several phones that are shipping now with it. So, you know, when I first heard about this, I was like, oh, awesome, I got to try this out. It's an open source operating system. So I got the first pre-release phone, and I got the release phone, and I lived with it for a week. This is how, yeah, I got people laughing back there going, oh, you didn't. No, I did. And I think this is crucially important, especially for us, that we don't evaluate things on whether or not they gel with our ideology, right? Or on feature sets, right? Or on reviews, but live with a technology for a week and see if it empowers you or it enfeebles you. That's what I did, right? This was my phone, and I turned it on for the first time, and this was hello. It said, set the date for me. I was like, okay, I'll set the date for you. But do you notice something here? I don't know if you can see it at the back. The starting date is January 09, 1980. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that probably nobody bought this phone in 1980. So why are you making me go through 30 years just to set the date? And why is this hello? That's a very rude hello, right? You wouldn't say that to someone you just met, set the date, right? You're like, what the fuck? You're a psychopath? This is a valid error message, apparently. Until I realized that this was a valid error message, I reinstalled the operating system twice because I thought, oh my gosh, there must be some huge, like crazy low-level bug and the actual error message formatting isn't coming up. No, somebody else said, no, I'm getting those too. So I stopped reinstalling the operating system. This is the Maps application. If you can't read the text in the opening screen of the text of the Maps application, that's okay. Neither could I, because it was something like 3-point fonts or something. This is the actual Maps app. There is a button down here. I don't know what it does because I've never been able to hit it. It became a casual game. Whenever I was bored, I would fire up the Maps app, and I'd be like, can I hit the button? It was like my own version of Flappy Bird, only there was no bird and it wasn't flapping. This was me sending a direct message on Twitter to my girlfriend. And if you can't see what I'm saying, that's okay, because neither could I, because the keyboard is covering it. Okay? And possibly the worst example out of my whole week was this. This is the Train Times website not rendering properly inside of this OS, which means that on that occasion, I did not know that every train in London Bridge Station had been cancelled, which in and of itself is amazing. And it meant that I got home 2 hours late, or 2 hours later than I should have. It was 2 hours of my life that I lost. And this is the effect that the things that we make have on people. They either empower them or they enfeeble them. How do they enfeeble them? By making them exert more effort than they have to, by making them lose time. Our lives are just a string of experiences, right? Whether that's experiences with people or experiences with things. And the quality of those experiences determine the quality of our lives. Now, we may not have a lot of control over the experiences that people have with other people, but we sure have control over the experiences they will have with the things that we make. That's a huge responsibility. That is at the core of what we do as makers. And today the problem is that open source is features-led. We are still living in this era where features mattered. And features did used to matter. And in some specialized areas, they probably still do. Features mattered because back in the day, a new feature might have meant the difference between something being possible or impossible, right? It might have been the difference between being able to go to the moon or not. Now, if that's what a new feature is going to give you, you're going to learn to use it no matter how hard it is. But today, at least in the consumer space, at least in a lot of the products that we use, there is feature parity. And in that case, features stop being the differentiating factor. And user experience starts becoming the differentiating factor. Open source today is a sandbox for enthusiasts. There's nothing wrong with this, per se. Enthusiasts making tools for other enthusiasts is perfectly fine. But we also need something else, and that's missing. We're harboring under what I call trickle-down technology, a theory of trickle-down technology. And it's like trickle-down economics. If you haven't heard about it, this is trickle-down economics. If we empower the really wealthy to be even wealthier, then somehow some of that wealth will trickle down to other people who also need it, right? In the US, this is very big. And we know that it doesn't work because if you look at the statistics, 1% of the population owns 40% of the wealth. Or to put it in another way, I believe it was Oxfam recently released figures, the 85 richest people in the world have as much wealth as the 3.5 billion poorest people in the world. So they're still waiting for the trickle down to happen. In the same way, in technology, in trickle-down technology, we harbor this faux pas that if enthusiasts create tools for other enthusiasts, then somehow magically they will become usable tools for consumers, right? And enthusiasts and consumers and maybe enterprise users, these are not different breeds of people. Enthusiast right now. Come on, there's got to be a lot of hands, right? Okay. That is still not who you are. I will bet anything that there are parts of your life where you're a consumer. Are you an enthusiast in everything you do? Or do you want the car that you drive to work to just work? Or do you love it when it breaks down because you go, fuck, that means I'm going to play with the engine, right? Because that's what we do with computers, right? The computer breaks down or our device breaks down, we go, awesome, weekend, right? Weekend of hacking. And there's nothing wrong with that. But we also need something else. And we need to understand that that's not going to magically translate into products that people in the role of consumers, which might be you, want to use. Because as a consumer, in your role as consumer, you just want it to work. This is why we spent 30 years giving people PCs when apparently all they wanted were iPhones, right? And then more than that, sadly, we said to them, you are too stupid. That is why you cannot use it. Whereas it was us who were too stupid because we couldn't make it simple enough. Why? Because that wasn't even our goal. That needs to change. We need to start concentrating on user experience. The companies that get it, Apple gets it, we all know, right? There's a stereotypical, I don't want to listen to it anymore. Yeah, they get it. But Google is starting to get it as well. If you've looked at Nexus phones, they get it. Not Android. Android itself is a clusterfuck if you look at the fragmentation and everything around it. But look at a Nexus phone. Look at the amount of focus that's gone into that. They get it. So what's common between Apple and Google when it works on, say, a project like Nexus? They control certain things. Definitely hardware, software, and services. Quite soon, possibly with things like Google Fiber, etc., possibly even connectivity, right? And this is important because control over these things, the combination of all of these things, is what the experience is. We can't separate it out. We can because we know the technology that goes into it, right? We can say, oh, this is a hardware issue, this is a software issue. For a consumer, they have a product. It works or it doesn't work. It delights them or it doesn't delight them. It empowers them or it enfeebles them. The age of features is over. We're today living in the age of experiences. One of the companies that makes one of these remotes gets it. And you can see it because the design is a symptom of the fact that they get it. What I mean by this is that design is not what great designers do. Design is what a design-led organizational structure and development process is. Great design is what that results in, right? So it's about organizational structure. It's about development processes. And what we need in open is a new category of technology, what I call experience-driven open. We need to start creating design-led open organizations that are not features-led, right? And design is not something you can do with a pull request. That's not how it works. It's holistic. We're talking about making things for creatures that are unpredictable, emotional, and irrational. That's us, right? And we can't ignore those scary traits. We can't try and distill them into a bunch of text boxes, into check boxes, right? We need to keep thinking about it, as scary as that is. Because design is not something that will trickle up in an organization. It has to trickle down. It has to come from the very top. And we need to start implementing this in open organizations. Great design is a symptom of a design-led organizational structure. This is really, really important. Whether we grok this or not is going to have a fundamental impact in the character of the society that we live in, because it's going to determine whether or not open can compete in the consumer space. And it hasn't been able to. In the last 30 years of the Free Software Foundation and the 20 years of open source that we've had, we do not have a single shining beacon of an open product that has had widespread mainstream adoption. And I'm not talking about at the infrastructure level. I mean at the consumer level, in people's hands, as a product. Why? Why? Because we have features-driven closed products. Look at Microsoft, Nokia, etc., right? But we also have experience-driven we have features-driven and we have experience-driven closed products as well. Apple, Google with Nexus. But in the open world, we only have features-driven open. We are missing a whole quadrant of technology. We are missing experience-driven open as a whole quadrant of technology that's not represented. A quadrant that we need to fill if we're going to compete in the consumer space. So what? Well, without it, we cannot empower regular people to own their own data. And that's something that I'm really passionate about. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing with IndiePhone. That's really, really important. That, empowering regular people to own their own data via these open solutions that are experience-driven, that's what I call indie technology. And there's a great example of how user experience can fundamentally alter how much engagement people have with their data and with control over their data. And just came across my radar recently. I've been looking at Caredot Data. Who's aware of this? So Caredot Data is an initiative by NHS England to get all of your data from your GP onto a centralized database and then to sell it, right? To pharmaceutical companies, to insurance companies, to pretty much in time probably anyone with the means, apart from you probably and your GP. It has backdoor access for the police to your health data, right, which they probably won't need a warrant for. And it's been getting some coverage. So maybe something that you don't want to take part in, so you probably shouldn't opt in, apart from the fact that it is opt-out. So you've all opted into this. All of your records are going to start being sent to this database in March. And if you want to stop it, well, if you want to learn about it, they sent a leaflet out to some people. I didn't get it at 2 different addresses because I just moved. But that leaflet under the pizza leaflet is the one that has all the information you need, apparently, how to opt out. How do you opt out? Well, currently, you write a letter, right? And then you either fax it, because we all have fax machines, or you take it in yourself to your GP. Now, this is a hard thing to do, right? It takes some effort to do. It's not trivial. So there are some websites like Med Confidential that were set up with letters that you could print out and fill out. That's easier, right? NHS England didn't do this. And this is a dark pattern. So making something difficult because it actually suits your needs. So what does NHS England want? They want all of you to be in this database, right? So is this a design failure that they didn't make some easy online one-click opt-out? No, it's a dark pattern. A dark pattern is great design. It just happens to be evil, right? So someone decided, well, why don't we do it for them? And they created faxyourgp.com, right? Faxyourgp.com, you enter your postal code over here. It tells you which GPs are nearby. And then if you enter your details, you can preview the message, and boom, it's sent to them and you've opted out. And Stefan Magdalinsky, who made it, said, I haven't written code in a decade, took us a weekend and a few quid to do. Now imagine the increase in engagement based on the user experience advantages that this has over faxing or bringing in. And that's what user experience is about. User experience is not about what happens in the screen. It's about the holistic experience. So this has hugely increased the engagement with this. So that's faxyourgp.com. Use it if you like. So when I was thinking about all of this, and it was a gradual process where I got more and more pissed off until the Snowden revelations, and that was the last drop for me. I was thinking, where can you have the most impact, right? How can we most decentralize data? And how can we have the most impact in getting people to have control over their own privacy? But regular people, not us. For us, the solutions already exist. You can make your own server. You can install own cloud. You can, look at Alex's Sovereign and install that with Ansible scripts. Fine. Regular people are not going to do this. And I thought, phones. These are the things that we're using the most right now. These are the things that we're creating data with the most, even if we're not, just by walking around with them with their sensors, right? And that's why I decided to do IndiePhone. So IndiePhone is a project to build an operating system called IndieOS. But an operating system by itself is not enough. If you build an open source operating system, that is not enough to solve the problem of getting people to own their own data, because you don't have an app ecosystem. You don't have a data ecosystem for where their data goes, right? So we're also building an open source cloud called Indie Cloud. But again, if you stop there, you have an operating system. Firefox has this, right? You have a cloud. That's great. OwnCloud has it. And no consumer is going to install these, because what's installing, right? I buy an iPhone, it just works. We need to compete with this experience. So we need to build a third thing that unifies the operating system and the cloud. And that's why we've undertaken the audacious task of actually building a phone. This projector is killing that render, which is so much nicer. You're going to have to come up to my laptop and look at it at some point. That's basically the phone under a red drape that we slaved over to get the right texture of velvet on. And it's, there we go. Indie phone. And the tagline isn't marketing. Deeply empowering, there's a reason for that. We can create experiences that are superficially empowering, Disney-esque experiences that in the short term empower you. Can you argue that Google Maps does not empower you? Of course it does. Can you argue that any of Google's apps don't empower you? Of course they do. But at what cost in terms of enfeebling you in the long term, in terms of your privacy and your civil liberties? So by deeply empowering, what I mean is not just the great experience in the now, not just that hit of dopamine, but empowering you so that you will enjoy civil liberties and human rights in the future. So when I present IndiePhone, I get a lot of questions, usually comparing it to other things. So what is IndiePhone? How is it different to phone blocks? Who's heard of phone blocks? Excellent, right? Phone blocks, basically Lego for the phone, right? It's really great, apart from the fact that it's closed and was being built in conjunction, is now being built in conjunction with Motorola, or was, also known as Motorola, a Google company, or was. Now that it's being sold to Lenovo, Google is keeping phone blocks. So it is yet another Google project now. So I don't need to spell out how we're different to them. Ubuntu Edge is another one. How are you different to Ubuntu Edge? Luca from Canonical is here today. Hello. He's working on their cloud solutions. Very cool. I've seen it. Ubuntu Edge. Well, Ubuntu Edge was billed as the Formula One of mobile phones, right? It was an enthusiast's wet dream, right? The latest features, the latest components. Heck, it dual booted, right? It had 2 operating systems on it. Also what I call multiple personality disorder. Why do you want your phone to go from Jack to Karen when you plug it into a monitor and a keyboard? I don't know, you know? So we're different. We're not the Formula One of phones because we don't already have a consumer line. What is Formula One? It is a way for car companies to push the technology so that they can learn things that they can then perhaps translate to their consumer line. Ubuntu Canonical didn't have a consumer line. We don't have a consumer line. It would be silly to make a Formula One. This was a great campaign. It was a great marketing campaign, and that's why Canonical can today partner with various manufacturers and various carriers, because they said, look, we broke every crowdfunding record even though we weren't successful. There is demand for this, and that was genius in and of itself. And they showed that you can raise 12 million, was it, on crowdfunding. That's awesome. Firefox OS, I've spoken about Firefox OS before, and the way that what Firefox OS does is it solves the problem of how do we create an open source operating system, preferably with technologies that we love to play with, right? Web technologies, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. But what they've built is a platform that can run applications built with web technologies and only run them. They don't ship with many applications of their own. They don't have a data solution of their own. Who's got the best web apps in town? Whose apps are you going to use if you have this operating system? I rest my case. And then we have the user experience issues on top of that. If you think my experiences were horrible in a week, I actually read an article titled, I used Firefox OS for 30 days and it made me want to quit phones forever. And that's it. You know, and I urge you, please, this is not in any way to disparage the work that Mozilla does, right? I do believe that they do things that are very useful. At the same time, I have my reservations about Mozilla as well. Because, I don't know if you know, they get more than 90% of their revenue from Google. In fact, I was talking about this, and someone from Mozilla said, no, that article that you referred to, that's got some shoddy reporting. It's actually closer to 97%, but don't quote me. I'm sorry, but if you get 97% of your revenue from one source, it is not a stretch to question whether or not that creates any vested interests in the sense of institutional corruption, as Lawrence Lessig would put it. So I have my questions there. With IndiePhone, we're bootstrapping right now. This is pre-crowdfunding, which I've learned means that my bank account is now empty. I've been going since August last year with this. We will be crowdfunding in the middle of this year. And my goal initially is not to take traditional venture capital, because venture capital is part of the problem that we have with the free system, right? Do you have a company that has millions of users and you have no business plan? Great. We'll give you lots of venture capital, because at some point we know we can ask you to screw your users, right? You have a company that's cash flow positive and it's actually got a sustainable business model, you're not going to get a penny of venture capital, right? And I don't want it. The IndiePhone business model is very, very simple. We sell you a beautiful phone, right? If you're not technically inclined, if you don't want to install the server yourself, then there's a beautiful seamless process where we can provision it for you and we can take care of it for you like a gardener would take care of your garden without exerting any ownership over it. And 3, there's no 3. That's it. Business models don't have to require a PhD to understand. And what there will not be on this platform, however, is ads. There will be no advertising whatsoever, because that is what leads to corporate surveillance. And there are some projects that I kind of consider to be in the same vein, like BlackPhone, if you've heard about it. They solve the problem of how do we empower people to communicate privately. And I think that's great. That's not the problem we're trying to solve. We're not trying to make an NSA-proof phone. I think that's a $1 billion problem, not a $1 million problem, and we're only going to be able to raise millions. And then there's Fairphone. They have built an ethical as possible phone and shipped 25,000 units. And they are a tiny company based in Amsterdam. And we're going to be working together with them to make sure that the hardware side is as ethically sourced as possible. Again, within pragmatic boundaries, because this is a hard problem to solve. And in terms of the timeline, well, it started in August 2013 with a commitment that I made publicly to doing this, finally. From September to November last year, I was going around the world doing dozens of talks to raise awareness and to try and get people to understand why that's important. In fact, one of those talks is now up at the Net Awards as Conference Talk of the Year. We've been nominated. There is public voting. The link.is/conference-talk-of, you get the idea, the year, will take you there. And if you do want to help with the cause, that is one way you can do it. Because if we win in any of the categories that we're nominated for, that will help raise awareness about this project. And then in November 28th, 2013, I went in front of a couple of thousand developers in Cardiff at a conference called the Handheld Conference, and this happened.
If you have something that you don't want anyone to know, maybe you shouldn't be doing it in the first place. Maybe you shouldn't be doing it in the first place.
and thus we launched IndiePhone. January to February of this year, we've been working on the industrial design of the phone, and we've got one that we're very happy with. When you see this thing, it will be unlike any other phone, not just because we're trying to be different, but because we are controlling hardware, software, and services, and actually the UI has had an impact on the hardware. And this is Victor, who we were working with. And even at this early stage, I think people are starting to get it. I've been nominated for Entrepreneur of the Year. Again, remember, this is on a website and a vision right now. And IndiePhone itself has been nominated for Game Changer of the Year. Again, if you go to the link.is / and then these, you can vote for them. Currently, we're bootstrapping. We're hopefully going to have about 100 grand as a budget. This is when my flat that my family has in Ankara sells. It's currently on sale. That's how I'm going to be basically financing the bootstrapping until we get to crowdfunding. Because basically, I don't need a flat in Ankara, and I need this phone to exist. If you want to help out, you know what to do with this. And we're going to be crowdfunding in mid-2014. And the goal is to ship this phone in 2016. I think we have a window of a couple of years. And if we don't do it now, it's going to get exponentially harder because the competition is not staying put. So that is the story of IndiePhone. And if you believe in this vision, I hope you join us. Thank you. I can give it to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Am I right? That's all been recorded, Andrew?
Yes.
So,
And if you do need my email, it's just my first name at my full name.com, aral@aralbalkan.com.
So, questions?
Any questions?
We'll
Yes.
just take a few questions and then we're going to food.
Yeah, if you really believe that
Sorry. Wait. They're recording this, so let me get close to you. There.
if you really believe that we're all irrational beings, then maybe you should tell Google.
Tell Google that we're irrational? Well, irrational doesn't necessarily mean unpredictable, though. Yeah. Well, but what's the subtext of your question? Tell Google what?
There's a contradiction
How so?
because the data that Google collects is very much determined by the rationality of human beings, not the irrational.
Not necessarily. I think it shows them patterns that may not necessarily be due to a rational thought process necessarily. I mean, there are patterns within our emotions. There are patterns in which we react to the world. Depending on how philosophical we want to go, and I'd love to go deeper into it over a beer.
2 years, it's definitely a phone.
It's definitely a phone.
I was curious to kind of, with all the technologies and things that you might be doing in 2 years, do you think it's a phone?
I think so. I think in terms of the hub, that's not going to change. I think wearables are going to be very important, and quite possibly there might be other people who believe in this platform who might be supporting the platform in that way. But what we need is focus. Right now, as I see it, there is no consumer alternative that I can use without sacrificing my experience. I'm using an iPhone right now, and I don't want to be. I was developing iOS apps, and I stopped because I didn't want to be contributing to a closed silo. So I want these benefits without sacrificing my user experience, and I want there to be an alternative in the consumer space. And that is an audacious project in and of itself. So we need as much focus as we can. So we're going to focus ruthlessly on the hardware, the software, the services, make those as tightly coupled as possible. You want to do it for other stuff, you can fork it, but we're going to remain focused and just make this phone, because I want one alternative at least.
I'm going to take 2 more questions because there are people looking at the door wondering if we're still going. One question at the back and then Adam to finish.
I will stay for a little bit. I have to go back to Brighton, but I'll stay for a little bit for beers if you want to chat.
How will this mesh with all the other ecosystems that I'm using? For example, all my friends use Facebook. I'll be sending mail to Google. They're still reading mail that I'm sending
Yeah.
to other people.
That's a great question. Thank you. The goal is not to disconnect you from the world. As I see it, the goal is to wean you from these slowly. So the canonical place for your data will be your server, but then you want to distribute that, we will make that as easy as possible for you to distribute that to Facebook, to Twitter. I use Twitter. I'm a Twitterholic. You know, I'm not going to just give up on that right now, but I want to wean myself off of it as well. And if it becomes easier to lead someone to my timeline via my URL than it does to tweet about it, then at that point I know that I would have won that, right? And in the same way, we're going to let you weave in your social networks into your own timeline if that's what you want to do. Already with the indie web movement, we've started experimenting with weaving in our indie posts into our other timelines, and we can do the same with those networks as well. So the answer to your question is we're going to slowly try and wean both you and me and ourselves off of this. But that doesn't mean to disconnect you. I mean, the idea here is not to build a nanny phone that stops you from doing something you want to do, right? The idea is to make it so that the defaults protect you as much as possible and give you the option, give you control.
Okay, last question from Adam, and then we're going to break for sandwiches and beer.
Okay, yes, sir.
So what is the business model? If you get money from me for selling me a phone,
Yes.
how do you maintain the service going forward, looking after my service?
Well, I mean, that is, oh, sorry, if I didn't mention it, if you want us to look after your server, that will be a paid service. So a monthly fee. And as far as I can imagine this, that is the most honest, most transparent way of making this sustainable.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you to all our speakers, and as usual, I'm going to give the last word to the chairman of the Open Source Group,
Please.
Cornelia Boldyrath.